We've been talking a lot about the Americans with Disabilities Act and what is required in your office, whether it be physical accommodations or also aids for the patients that come in that may have disabilities and that are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. And so this week, really, we're going to talk about, okay, what does that look like on the enforcement side of things? In other words, what can they do? What can happen if you don't do these things, if you don't adhere to these requirements under the ADA? Well, quite candidly, there are a couple of different ways that this can be enforced. One is with a direct complaint to the federal government, which goes to the Office of Civil Rights. And at that stage, then those complaints are typically handed over to the Attorney General, who does a full investigation. Now, that investigation wouldn't just be limited to what the complaint was about. So if the complaint was about not having the appropriate aids for someone that came in with a disability, but then it would open up to all other facets, including your physical office and what needs to be done there. So everything would be in play. And so, the Office of Civil Rights involved, the Attorney General is involved at that stage. Now, what else can happen? Well, the patient can actually choose to not go that route, and they can actually choose to just simply file a lawsuit, regarding the Americans with Disabilities Act. So they can file an ADA lawsuit privately, not including the OCR. Incidentally, just on a side note, actually both things can happen. In other words, the patient could file a private lawsuit and then also turn around and involve the Office of Civil Rights as well. So all of these things are in play. But on a private lawsuit, then again, they're going to really look at everything at that stage because they want to know all of the different things, but really to be more specific. And sometimes you even have attorneys that do what they call drive-by lawsuits. In essence, they'll literally drive by your office. They look at the outside. If the office is not in compliance, then at that stage, then they'll either have someone with a disability make the complaint, or they can file on behalf of somebody with a disability at that stage as the plaintiff. So it's a really interesting process there on the private side of things. But you have both private lawsuits and also then you have civil complaints made to the federal government. Both are actionable and both need to be you need to be aware of. Now, what can happen? What are the penalties that are associated with that? Well, at that stage, the courts are given this really broad sweeping authority according to the ADA on what they can enforce and how that looks. So one, they can actually force you to make physical updates to your office. They can force the addition of the auxiliary aids. They can actually award monetary damages to the complainant. So they can determine what the damages to that particular plaintiff is, and at that stage award damages. Now, it could be just the complainant. So in other words, it could be the person who just filed a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights can also be awarded monetary damages. So either way, all of these things are in play, both in private and in the public complaint. They can add civil penalties of up to $96,000 per incident. By the way, if it's a second offense, that goes up exponentially. They can add punitive damages and also award the plaintiff's attorney's fees. And so all of these things are in play, and the costs are pretty exorbitant. Now, here's what judges can do when they look at this, and actually the ADA carves this out as an important piece. The judges can then take into account your good faith effort and steps that you've taken in order to mitigate those fines and those penalties. In other words, if you're being carte blanche and just ignoring it altogether and you're not taking the appropriate steps, then maybe they don't take that into consideration at all. But if you're actually making a true good faith effort in order to meet someone's needs and requirements under the ADA, they can take that into consideration to lower those things. So again, I'm going to come back to what we have said in previous weeks. Have a plan. Don't just say, I'll deal with it when the time comes. Begin to take the steps on those things in your office that can be updated and are honestly what the ADA considers to be a requirement for you to update, even if you're not doing major construction change to your office. And obviously, if you are doing a renovation to your office, you can do that too. Now, one thing to consider, if you're leasing, a lot of times take a really close look at your lease agreement. Your landlord may be responsible for some of those physical updates that have to be done. Take a look at your lease, and I would pressure them now in order to get that done. Why? Because ultimately, remember, we talked about this a few weeks ago. You're responsible. Even if it's the landlord's responsibility, you're still responsible because you are the public place of accommodation. So push your landlord to be able to get those things taken care of appropriately. That's really, really important. Now, Sometimes I hear from doctors, well, you know what, I'll just wait until there's a complaint, and then, the fine isn't going to cost me as much as it would to make all of these updates and do all of these changes. The fact of the matter is there are so many other factors involved. The fines and the settlement amounts are typically the small amount. I saw one recently, it was like $3,500, but really the costs include attorney's fees, mediation and arbitration costs, other findings from the ADAs and shortfalls and corrections you have to make. So all of these fines and penalties and costs, and you still have to do the updates. Don't wait. Take care of the updates today. We'll catch you next week.